Welcome to The Explainer. So today, we're going to get into something pretty provocative. It's an analysis of modern Taiwan, but from a specific commentator's point of view. And their whole argument is that the nation is dealing with this massive, multi-layered crisis of, well, deception. All right, let's just jump right in. The source we're looking at makes this incredibly bold claim. They're basically saying that deception isn't just a small problem, it's everywhere, at every single level of society. We're talking from the bottom, with organized crime, all the way to the top, to the very stories we tell ourselves about how the economy works. So to get a handle on just how big we're talking, the commentator brings up this one example. It's a group called the Crown Group, an international fraud ring. And get this, their alleged global profits were over 4 trillion new Taiwan dollars. I mean, that number is it's staggering. Hard to even wrap your head around. Okay, so let's start at the beginning with the first and, the most obvious layer of this whole argument. We're talking about large-scale criminal fraud. The source isn't just calling it a problem. They're saying it's basically a full-blown industry. You see, the commentator really hammers this point home by showing the Crown Group's footprint right there in Taiwan. This wasn't some far-off, abstract thing happening somewhere else. No. We're talking about super real, super lavish assets that were basically the anchor for their whole operation. Think about it. Shell companies, a fleet of supercars, and even a gambling center inside the famous Taipei 101. And this is where it gets really wild. The commentator points out this huge disconnect. On one hand, you have an estimated 4.5 billion new Taiwan dollars laundered just in Taiwan by this one group. And on the other hand, a key suspect's bail was set at just 150,000. The difference is just unbelievable. And to top it all off, that same key suspect reportedly seen smiling when they were released. So you can see why the commentator makes this argument, that for some of these people, going into a prosecutor's office is like, and I'm quoting here, walking into their own backyard. It just suggests there's absolutely no fear of any real consequences. Now, to show this isn't just a few bad apples, but a systemic thing, the speaker drops this bombshell of a comparison. They claim the number of people working in the scam industry is almost as big as the workforce at TSMC. Yeah, that TSMC, Taiwan's world-famous tech giant. That really puts it into perspective, doesn't it? And that brings us to the real pivot point of this whole analysis, right? If this is how things are with pretty straightforward financial crime, what on earth happens when those lines get blurry? What happens when this kind of deception creeps into the political arena? Okay, so now we're at layer 2. And according to the source, this is where things get way more dangerous. We're talking about political scams. And the reason they're so damaging is because they happen right out in the open, hidden in plain sight, usually wrapped up in some kind of ideology. So for a big example of this, the speaker points to the government's transitional justice program. And here's the alleged hypocrisy they're talking about. On one hand, the government promotes a really strong anti-China stance. But on the other, this program apparently exonerated and even paid historical figures who were known CCP members trying to, subvert the state. It's a pretty heavy accusation. And then the commentator connects the dots, drawing this parallel. They're basically saying there's a pattern of being soft on this stuff. So you've got past agents being totally exonerated, and at the same time, current spies who get caught are facing really low bail and light sentences. From the source's perspective, that's a massive fundamental contradiction. And this is where the source really brings the hammer down with this rhetorical question. The whole point they're making is that the government's very public, very loud anti-China talk is, in their view, a political scam because it's completely undermined by what they actually do. All right, that brings us to the final layer. And honestly, this might be the most controversial part of the whole argument. We're talking about a deception that, according to the speaker, has worked its way into the very fabric of how we think about the economy. So for this last layer, the commentator takes aim at something almost everyone believes about Taiwan's economy, the whole story we hear about the housing crisis. And right off the bat, they just completely flip the script on this issue. The speaker says that all this public anger about high housing prices, it's a misdirection. They literally call it a scam. The argument is that the real problem isn't that houses cost too much, it's that people's wages haven't gone up enough to afford them. And to back this up, they pull out this really surprising comparison. They claim that over the last 2 decades, the average cost of a home has gone up pretty much in line with general inflation. And the benchmark they use? A simple tea-egg. So they're saying the core issue, again and again, is stagnant income, not runaway house prices. So if you follow that logic, the speaker gives this really stark warning about trying to crash housing prices on purpose. They lay out this whole domino effect. Think about it. They say 80% of households in Taiwan own their homes. So if prices crash, all of those people suddenly lose a huge chunk of their net worth. What happens next? People stop spending money. And when that happens, businesses suffer, and it's the regular wage earners who get hit the hardest with layoffs. And see? This is how it all ties back to that central theme of deception. The commentator calls the popular anti-real estate story a traffic scam, basically a way for the media and online influencers to get clicks and views by making people angry, all while distracting everyone from the much tougher, more complicated problem of why wages aren't growing. So, in the end, the source we've been walking through leaves us all with this one really challenging question. We live in a world where we're just bombarded with information, right? You've got criminal stories, political stories, economic stories, all of them fighting for your attention. And maybe the most important skill we can have now is just learning how to spot the difference between what's real and what's just a really, really good story.